Hey guys, welcome back right here to the Game of Inches podcast powered by Mayflower Sports. I am your host, Andrew McGinnis, joined by my co-host, Jacob Smith, and we have Willy Palov from the Chronicle Herald joining us once again. Willy, happy to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
I guess the first question I want to ask you is what's going on in the QMJHL? Can you update us on, how the season ended for the Halifax Mooseheads and how it ended for the Cape Breton Screaming Eagles?
Yeah, I think, it's been 3 weeks now, and at the time, they were in a bit of a pause trying to figure out whether they'd be able to get over the New Brunswick border or vice versa to play, I guess it would have been a second round series against somebody. And then they just decided that that was enough, right? They'd been through some pauses already. They'd been playing Cape Breton and Charlottetown and Halifax in one sort of 3-team league, if you want to call it that. And it was getting a bit much for the players and the teams and fans and everybody. So there was no real science to it. They just said, let's call a season. So that was the end of that. And now we're into the second round in the Quebec League playoffs. So Charlottetown kept going. So they're playing Bathurst now. Bathurst came out of New Brunswick, and then there's 3 other quarterfinals going up in Quebec, and all of it's being played inside bubbles in Quebec. So the 3 Quebec teams are all in Quebec City, and then the other series is in Shawinigan. So eventually the semifinals and final will all be in Quebec. So that's where we are.
How do you think Charlotte's going to fare in that second round?
I just wrote a column about it today, so it kind of forced me to look more closely at it. I mean, the short answer is I think they'll win, but I think it's going to be a 4 or 5 game series because we forget because we haven't seen the team from New Brunswick all year, really. I mean, going back to mid-November, but Bathurst's a good team. They're probably targeting next year to go all in, if you want to call it that, but they're good now too. And you have to be good to come out of New Brunswick against St. John, who has a pretty good team too. So the test for Charlottetown will be that they've had to play, and I don't mean disrespect to Cape Breton and Halifax by putting it this way, but they've only been playing the Mooseheads and Eagles for basically 5 months, and they're a rebuilding team. So you're a good team like the Islanders, and you're, going against younger players, and you're winning a lot, and then all of a sudden you're into a short 5 game series against a legitimate veteran team. So they'll be pushed, but they are a really good team, especially on defense and in goal. So I like their chances.
The last time we spoke, you and I discussed how some of these teams were forced to play the same teams countless times in a row, same as in the NHL right now. And I think in between the last time you and I spoke and right now, there was kind of a line brawl with the Halifax Mooseheads and the Charlottetown Islanders. We saw that coming. I expected it to come a lot sooner. What can you say about these teams that played each other so many times in a row? I mean, how did they stay competitive? How did they stay fresh? You kind of said to me last time that they were just happy to be out there, but it must have been kind of tough on the players to play the same team so many times.
Yeah, I mean, looking into that Charlottetown Bathurst series, I counted the times the Islanders played the Mooseheads 19 times, and then it would have been, I'm going to guess 20 between Cape Breton, Halifax, Cape Breton, Charlottetown. That's a lot, right? Like it's only human nature that things are going to carry over from game to game, and you don't see fights in the Quebec League like you did 10 or 15, even 20 years ago. They're occasional now, so yeah, to see a line brawl, that probably tells you all you need to know. And we're obviously we're seeing it the NHL too. I mean, these teams in their divisions are playing each other 8 times. That's a lot too, and in a shorter period of time too. So, I mean, I'm not gonna compare what happened in the Quebec League to what everyone's talking about with Tom Wilson and the Rangers and everything else. But it is, in a lot of ways, it is similar. So, it's kind of an emotional sport in the first place. It's intense, and once in a while it's going to get away from you. So that probably played into it too, with Halifax and Cape Breton decided just to call it a season.
Since you already touched on it, what were your thoughts on the brawl in the Rangers and Caps game? Because that was wild. There was like 100 penalty minutes in the first period or something crazy. Like, I thought there was going to be an answer, but I didn't think it was going to be a full-on line brawl.
Yeah, like the Quebec League, you don't see that anymore in the NHL either. The game's trending away from having that many fighters in the lineup, so probably they had to think pretty carefully about who to start because there aren't that many guys experienced at it like there used to be. So um, again, I suppose the best way to look at it, it's isolated. It's not going to be a regular thing anymore. But overall, it's just sad how it all unfolded. It doesn't make either of those teams look good. Certainly doesn't make the Department of Player Safety look good. And then when the NHL reacted and fined the Rangers for their statement, it all, you boil it all together and it just comes off as, I hate to say this, but like a little bit Bush League.
Definitely.
They don't have it under control. And I think anybody watching knows that fighting, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, it's trending away from that. So let's just get on board and deal with it, right?
What I found the most interesting about that, and a lot of people that I work with, whether it's just in the sports media world or sports betting, they were trying to, gauge the interest in that game from the outside perspective. People that are watching a regular MLB game that night or a regular NBA game, who tuned into that game just to watch that brawl happen, right? So some people were saying it might be good for the game. Others were saying, hey, we don't need that. We already have loyal fans and stuff like that. I do want to circle back, Willie, to the Halifax Mooseheads with a few more questions as far as that goes. But I might as well ask you. I mean, Morgan Barron, from around here, local kid, Halifax, Nova Scotia, dropped the mitts and tried to get it going in the spirits of it with TJ Oshie. There were already countless fights before that. We saw him drop the gloves. He was ready to go. I'm not sure if Oshie saw it. I know that he skated away. Maybe he just didn't want to, or it looked to me like he didn't even really see it. But got to give him credit. I mean, his third NHL game, and he was ready to go.
Well, if your third NHL game, you're probably more willing to go. You do anything, and I'm sure he's reading the temperature of that situation and thinking, I want to be on board with the team and what it appears like everybody wants to happen here, and because he's a college player. I mean, I would have to triple check this, but there's really no fighting in the NCAA, so he wouldn't have experience with that as far as I know. But the other thing too, I mean, Morgan's 6'4", 220 pounds, and it's not a big person's game like it was 15 years ago. So I doubt TJ Oshie had a lot of interest in taking on somebody that size. And Morgan, I'm sure, would be smart enough to realize that he could hang on and do okay no matter what his level of experience is. But anybody who's trying to break in the league, I mean, they would fill water bottles or fight or do anything it takes, right? So it doesn't surprise me from that standpoint.
What have you made of his first 3 games? Because he was doing pretty well in the AHL. If I'm not mistaken, he had 21 points in 20 games, and then obviously he's played the 3 games now, and he's got his first career goal. I don't think he looks overly out of place for being a 6th-round pick and starting the season in the AHL. I think he kind of fits into their lineup pretty well. He's a little bit of a bigger body than they have.
Yeah, definitely. And the plus side of all that brawling was there's so many guys in the penalty box that his ice time was second among New York forwards that game, 18 minutes, which means obviously there was an opportunity, but also that the coaches trusted enough to keep putting him out there because I think 5 or 6 of those minutes were killing penalties. So Morgan, he's obviously got some skill, as you said, point a game in the AHL and had a good last year at Cornell. But the book on him is that he's more of a two-way player, a character guy, and can kill penalties and that kind of thing. Obviously big, like we talked about. So there are always roles for that type of player, at least at the start. Whether that means he can rise higher than being maybe a third line center up into the second line, something like that. We'll see how that goes. But having the well-rounded defensive game is a big advantage when you're trying to push your way into a lineup because the top 6 is only 6 players. It's pretty hard to get into the first 2 lines. So he's got room to make a role for himself for sure.
For me, Willie, I'm a lot more familiar with the route that people take to get to the QMJHL. I think a lot of our viewers and a lot of people from Halifax are probably a lot more familiar with that transition from playing in the Maritime Hockey League or playing Major Midget around here. What can you tell us about his journey to where he got to right now? I mean, compared to his brother playing in the QMJHL, captain of the Halifax Mooseheads. This is a question that I'm genuinely asking. I'm not really too familiar with. What's the journey he took to get to where he is versus, let's say, his brother?
Well, yeah, it's funny. I mean, being brothers, they're kind of a perfect comparison for the roots. Justin, he's born in November sometime, so he started as a 15-year-old, and if you saw him skate at 15 years old, even in training camp or the preseason, you wouldn't be able to tell him apart from a 19 or 20-year-old. Like, he was very advanced at a young age. He came out of midget, he was good right away, and that was on a good team. So it made more sense for him to jump straight from midget into major junior, and then, as we all know, into being a first-round NHL pick, and now he's playing in the American League. His game was more advanced than most guys his age. Compared to Morgan, I didn't see him play midget, but I did ask him about it once, and as we talked about, he was a big kid even then, called himself a late bloomer. So he had a good midget career here in Nova Scotia, but I think was smart enough to realize he's going to need a lot more time to get to where he wants to go. So he went up, he played prep school in Ontario for a couple of years, and then eventually made his way to Cornell. And it wasn't, I mean, he had a good freshman and sophomore season there, but he really progressed as his time went on at Cornell. So not everybody comes out ready to make those big steps the way Justin did. And I know long term sounds like we're talking about a lot of years. Morgan's only 22 years old, but that is a long time in the evolution of a hockey player from 16 to 22. So those would be the two things, because if you talk to them in person, you know much about them. They're both obviously intelligent kids, do really well in school. I mean, Morgan went to an Ivy League university. Justin was the academic player of the month a bunch of times. So it was never a question, I don't think, that it was all about the schooling necessarily, but just if we're talking strictly about hockey development, then those two guys kind of represent a route that suits them the best. So it's a good lesson for anyone who maybe might think they need a bit more time than somebody who's a hotshot coming out of midget.
Yeah, that's a good point, because the university hockey or the college hockey, I think, goes overlooked for that it does give a lot of guys a lot more time, and you're starting to see a lot more like 20, 21-year-olds breaking into the NHL from the college hockey than we've seen before. But speaking on the draft, is there any players from the Mooseheads that you think are going to go out this year to the draft? Because there's been a lot of talk of putting the drafts together, and I don't know how scouts basically are going to be able to do their due diligence on finding prospects this year. So I was wondering if there's any Moosehead players that you thought could be coming out that are either being overlooked or underlooked or any sort of thing like that.
Yeah, well, for starters, Zach LaRue, pretty good chance he'll go in the first round. At worst, he'll go high in the second round, and he has the advantage of he was watched quite a bit as a 16-year-old before all this shutdown came. So a lot of scouts can work off that, and they did find, some teams anyway, found ways to get new people involved and in the rink in Halifax or wherever, because really scouting off videos is tough, right? Like, you don't get the same feel for what you're looking at. So his stock should be pretty representative of where he is, and should be fairly similar to what it would have been in a quote normal year. Cam Wynot, I think, is going to get a little bit underrated. I've always thought he's a really good player, but perhaps to the extent that he might get a look in the late first round, but he probably should be in the second round. But I see lots of places where he's not mentioned in that range. Some people wouldn't even have him in their top 100. So the lack of viewings, I think, is going to hurt a player like him. And then you get a sleeper maybe in Bobby Orr. He didn't play as a 16-year-old in the Quebec League, so there's no way for scouts to have seen him there. He would have been a midget player. So what he did was pretty impressive considering the limited number of viewings, because his rankings are pretty consistent everywhere I look. You know, he's some people have him even as high as a second round. I don't know that he would go there, but for someone who started the year as maybe somebody just to put on the radar as a possible drafted player to being mentioned in the second or third range is good. So you get a little bit of everything. So I'd expect those three players all to get picked, which is a pretty good showing for any team.
I had to hold back a smile there, Willie, when I heard you say Bobby Orr is a sleeper. It's so, you know, it's hard not to do that. I know that I'm sure that guy has heard that so many times and the jokes probably get old for him, but hard to hold back that smile hearing the word sleeper and Bobby Orr in the same sentence. I wanted to ask you about the leadership, though, because I know leadership in every league right now has been huge. NHL, not a lot of fans and playing a lot of games against the same teams, and players are having their ups, they're having their downs. And what can you tell us about the leadership core of the Mooseheads this year and what you saw just during the tail end of the season?
Well, first of all, they had more than half the team was first-year players, so you needed some important leaders, and they were lucky that way because Justin was the captain, and it's easy to follow a guy like that because he's a first-round pick. He's done everything he can do. How could you dispute internally that you should follow his example? But they did well to bring in Liam Payton from Charlottetown as a 20-year-old. You know, he's played in a good organization in Charlottetown. His dad's a brigadier general in the Canadian military, which is kind of a well-known story about him now. But in person, just a impressive individual. He's really good manners and very adult-like, which is going to translate well into a young team like that. That, you know, despite everybody being on the same team, there's a huge gap between a 16-year-old and a 20-year-old, and if an overager conducts himself that way, then that goes a long way to helping the dressing room sort of stay on track. And other good players too, like Jason Horvath really stepped up this year as a leader. I thought he did a great job. And Elliot Denoye is new to the team this year, 18 years old, but he did a great job too. Just sets a good example by the way he works and the type of game he plays. He's pretty detailed and pretty responsible on both sides of the puck. So for a team that was that young, they got a lot out of a small group of experienced players. And you know, the challenge now will be that they're losing all those overagers, Alex Gravel being the other, who in his own way was a good leader too. But you lose three quality 20-year-olds like that and Justin Barron, then somebody's going to have to fill the void. You know, Elliot will do some of that, but next year's team, they're going to need a new group. And you know, it's going to be an interesting training camp to see who's ready to step up that way.
Yes, you pretty much just almost asked my question for me. I was going to say, next year, who are some of the young guys? You said over half the team this year was first-year players. Who are some of the guys you think that are going to make that jump next year? And maybe not necessarily in like a leadership role, but just in their game overall. Is there any player that you expect to kind of break through for the Mooseheads next year?
Well, we talked about Cam Wynot. He's ready to do more. He had a huge jump this year in his stats and his overall play. He learned a lot being around Justin Barron. He'll be ready to be the guy next year to take on a bigger role. Leadership wise, I think, you know, a guy like Santa Peters wouldn't be known to a lot of people for his personality, but he's a serious kid and he's well liked. He's respected. I thought he did well in a short season this year. He missed the first half in Halifax. He'll be back next year and he'll take over, I think, some of that. Zach Jones probably too, as a 20-year-old. But the players who will really jump forward will be that group of 16-year-olds from this year, because every single one of them came in and did great. And I suppose I would include Bobby Orr in that, even though he was 17. Just that nucleus of rookies, you know, Marcus Vidicek and Swan and Jordan Dumais and Jake Furlong are all very good players. It's really rare to see that many good players come in at one time, and play that well. And, credit to JJ Daniel for giving them that ice time to do that, because every one of them rose to the occasion. So I'm excited to see the jump they take next year with a little more muscle, a little growth, a little experience. They're going to be a fun group to watch.
I think I asked you this before, but I got to ask you again. I'm curious your response about just internally with the Mooseheads, obviously a great organization. How have they done such a great job with their European players? I mean, their European drafts have been amazing. It seems like they haven't missed once. They're always getting players. You mentioned Peters. What can you say about that? I mean, is it development? Is it the scouting? Is it a little bit of both?
Yeah, it's all those things, and it also it makes a big difference to be based in a big town. I mean, if we're realistic, it's harder to attract the really high-end players to a rural market, which is about half of the league. Quebec's got the same track record for the same reason, but that's just a simplistic way to start it all. The rest of it is, they invest a lot of time and money in getting it right. I know when they have picks, Cam Russell likes to scout them himself. He'll go over to Europe for 2 or 3 weeks, and he's already obviously got people watching there for him, and he's got a list of players he wants to look at. But when it comes down to it, he wants to familiarize himself with those kids and meet them, talk to the families, make sure that they come from a good home, so that it's not going to be a problem for them when they leave their country and come here, because it's a lot more than just scouting a player when you're talking about a European, because this is someone who's got to come across the Atlantic. Usually it's a second language. Sometimes they don't speak any English when they get here, so it's a more complicated scouting mission than the average one. And they've done really well, even with later picks, because most teams can do well if you're picking in the top 5 or top 10. But
right.
if you're bringing in good players like Sena Peters later in the draft, then that speaks well to the background checks you've done on him. So again, not all of the smaller franchises have that luxury to be able to send a general manager over to Europe for that amount of time. It's expensive. But good on the Mooseheads for making the most of that competitive advantage, right?
Definitely, yeah. That's one thing that I've always noticed too, obviously growing up in Halifax. All the Europeans seem to be studs for some reason. So that's always a plus for us as a fan and plus for the organization. But just kind of a hypothetical for you here. Do you think there's a possibility next year that we're not doing this Atlantic bubble thing for the QMJHL, that we're actually going to get a chance to maybe play some other teams?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's hard to answer that right now when we're having the biggest spike in Nova Scotia at this moment. But if we step back to the big picture, the vaccinations are really picking up the pace right now. Even here, a third of our population has been vaccinated. So if we fast forward into training camp in mid-August, and then the preseason runs through most of September, a lot is going to change by the time the season starts in late September, early October. So how many months is that? 4, 5? That's a lot of opportunity to get people vaccinated. And I think not just here or even out across the region and into Quebec are people anxious to get back to some sort of normal life. But I think at some point, maybe by the end of the summer, everybody's going to want just to take a leap and say it's time to have some fans there, or to travel, to play each other and everything else, because that was, at least as my understanding, is why they couldn't do it this year, is just crossing the borders, right? And it obviously worked here, with the exception of what's happening this week and the week before with our cases. It worked well to isolate ourselves, but hopefully there's kind of that herd immunity in place, and we can get back to seeing the league at its its full operations again. I hope so. I'm looking forward to seeing more than just 2 teams again next year.
I'm sure you're looking forward to writing about more than just two teams as well. Willy, we've talked about the players a lot. I want to get into coaching. I think that you look at the Halifax Mooseheads, ever since Dominic Ducharme, now head coach of the greatest organization in the history of the NHL, might I add, there hasn't been that many steady coaches, it seems like. There hasn't been that many steady coaches for the Halifax Mooseheads. There's also now been another mix-up. What can you say about that and now the change they've made?
Yeah, that's a good question. Dom brought a lot of stability for 5 years because he was a great coach. He was comfortable here until he reached a point where, you know, his kids were in Quebec and they were getting older, and he just felt like he wanted to make sure not to miss out on more of their childhood. So that led to the change that you're talking about, and I think initially felt like when they brought in Andre Tourigny that on a 5-year deal that would be just another chunk of time where they'd have that kind of stability, and on paper it made all kinds of sense. And then at least the way that we've heard it, Andre had similar feelings and wanted to be closer to his family, and then that led to Jim Midgley getting his chance, which I still think on paper was a good move. I have a lot of respect for Jim's coaching, and there comes a time when you have to give assistants an opportunity to be a head coach. And he had a winning record, and I think if they weren't hosting the Memorial Cup the next year, who knows, we might still be talking about Jim Midgley as a head coach. And that's really unfortunate for him, because I think those circumstances forced a decision that maybe he didn't deserve. And then if we're talking about, you know, the next year, another new coach, Eric Veilleux comes in, they had to find somebody that could deliver in a short time frame. I think Eric did a good job of that, but he's a guy who wants to be a professional and work in the NHL, and it didn't surprise me when he left either. So when JJ came in, it looked good on paper. I got to know him over the past 2 years. He's a terrific guy, really, really easy to talk to, very honest and straightforward. And like we were talking about with all those rookies doing so well, I thought he did a good job with the development, which was a key part of this season. So that was the first time I was really surprised, because at least from my perspective on the outside looking in, it seemed like, you know, he was working through a tough couple of years. So, but the bottom line is now we're into the 5th coach in 6 years. Sylvain Favreau is known to the team. The players know him. You know, Cam Russell and Bobby Smith, he's a known quantity to him. So they're going to need to get it right, though. I hope for it. He's another good guy. He strikes me as a smart guy who is ready for the job. But yeah, you know, it starts to raise questions outside of your organization, and they don't want that or need that, because whatever all those circumstances are that I just mentioned, the numbers don't lie. 5 coaches in 6 years. So, you know, if you're talking about kids who take their development and their stability seriously, then they're going to wonder, and you know, nobody really wants that, right?
Definitely. It's nice to have the same face every single year. And I'm not trying to compare things at all. And I think that you mentioned that your son plays basketball. I'm not sure if you said that you've coached him before. I think you're involved in the coaching and stuff like that. And I've coached as well. And with coaching, you know, I like that I've had, you know, some of the same kids for a couple of years to develop and you build those relationships with. So I think everybody can understand that you don't want to have a different coach every year. I got to ask you one more question, Willie, before we get you out of here. We appreciate your time. Seriously, happy to have you on. The one quote, Willie, that you had on the last time that we spoke, which kind of stuck with me, and I think I'm not sure if you saw, I made a post about it through our social medias. You said Justin Barron might have been the smoothest skater the Halifax Mooseheads have ever seen. What can you say about that quote you gave us and what you expect to see from him in the minors and eventually in the pros?
Yeah, I stand by that. I mean, obviously, you know, Nathan McKinnon is probably the most powerful skater, and there've been some other fast guys too, like Brandon Reed and Jules or Larac, are probably a little before your time. But if you watch Justin go side to side and backwards, and I mean every direction, it's just you know, you can't teach that kind of skating. So he's already doing well 2 or 3 games into the AHL. Probably won't get called up now, but you never know. There could be emergency circumstances with the Avalanche. But a little bit like how I was saying earlier that when he came into the Quebec League, he looked like he'd been there for a couple of years already. I feel like that'll happen at the NHL level as well. The only thing working against him is the Avalanche have a ton of depth on their blue line, especially for young offensive players. So he might have to be patient or wait for somebody to get moved, that kind of thing. But I really think that it's a matter of time before he's in the league, and once he's there, he'll be there for 10 or 15 years. He's a durable all-around player, and I say durable despite what we know has happened with it was a fluke injury with his blood clot, and that's been dealt with. Like, he's a big, strong kid who knows how to play in any role. So just give him a couple of years, and we'll be seeing him as a mainstay back there, I think.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Willy, for coming on. We really appreciate it. Everybody out there, if you're from Halifax, you should already know Willy, but if you don't, check out his work with the Chronicle Herald. Willy, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Willy.
Thanks for having me, guys. Nice talking to you.